Leadership failure on the job site. Many restoration business owners struggle with the accountability on the job site. When workers don't follow protocol, who's really responsible? The techs, project manager, the owner. This episode, we're going to dive into leadership breakdowns, the consequences of poor or lack of accountability, and practical strategies, hopefully, to enforce standards without micromanaging. Welcome to Disaster Podcast. Welcome to Disaster Podcaster. Welcome to Disaster Podcaster, Season 5, Episode 3. Hey, welcome, Toby. How you doing?
What's up, buddy? Pretty good. Pretty good.
Good job on the last couple episodes, by the way. I'm getting a lot of good feedback on those. So I'll let you go ahead. What do you think about this opening core idea that we're talking about today?
Well, it's interesting because I've had a few calls recently with clients, and we're talking about this topic, and that's where this came from. One particular scenario was a team was instructed to grab some specific equipment, PPE, things along those lines, before they left the shop. They went to the job and they didn't wear it. They didn't use the PPE. They didn't use some of the equipment. And there was a lead tech. There was a project manager. At some point, there was a GM. And at one point, the owner was actually there. So all levels were there. They missed documentation. They didn't use the PPE. And the question became, who's responsible? There was a lot of finger pointing that started going on. And we had to process that. Like, we had to say, man, if everybody shows up and all the leaders are on board, who's responsible? So the crew's there, you've got site leads, and you, the owner. So there was several roles of leadership on the job, but nobody was accountable. And the problem is that because everyone was there and there was no predetermined accountability in place, everybody assumed that everybody else was going to say something.
That's a good story. I think, Toby, what I see, from when I hear that story, and I think the phenomenon that happens is you have people, a project manager or a lead tech that has some level of authority and they've taken the lead on a job. But as leaders show up, if you don't have a good culture of leadership, then they give away that power quickly and no one does what they're supposed to do because they think now that the owner's there, they would just be told what to do next. So I think maybe we focus on this. Leadership is also empowering others to, if I put you in charge of this, you stay in charge of it. I'm not here to do that. So that's a good story. I don't know who that was, but did it work out okay? I mean, did they work through it? And did y'all
they worked through it. I think we still have some room for improvement, some room for education and learning, but that's life, right?
Accountability is hard, man. That's a big old sunshine to shine on things. Let me talk about the obvious elephant in the room when it comes to leadership and accountability. The funny thing about the word accountability is most of us don't truly hold ourselves fully accountable. We claim we use that word a lot. It's very catchy. But I want to talk about the gap, and the gap being where we think it's right and what we think we're doing. So many restoration companies have what we called a leadership vacuum on the job sites. How you lead in the office and around the company is different than you do on the field. As we just mentioned, if you have someone that you've granted authority on a project, they need to keep that. They need to own that, and they don't need to give it away freely to anyone else, and they don't need to let anybody take that responsibility. And it's not that they want to be in charge. It just means that if my name is riding on this project, I want to set the standard and things like that. The myth of self-sufficient crews, there's a myth of that. People would love to have fully autonomous crews that can go out and deploy and not need oversight, management, leadership. Leadership's not about being a boss, right, Toby? It's about being a guide, a GPS, and directing people and helping block sometimes for all the other things. But it's also setting the standard and reminding them, because when you're on a job when you're on a job site, especially in restoration where shit changes often and sometimes for no good reason, and that can like take your focus off the goals and the mission and your PPE and things like that we were talking about a while ago, and something else urgently becomes more important for at least a while. And during that gap, you have these omissions of standards and things like that. We want you to know that assuming that your crews in the field will always do the right thing is a very dangerous, slippery slope. The old term, again, we're not trying to micromanage, but it's not what you expect, it's what you inspect. People mean to do well, but life happens, jobs happen, chaos ensues. It's fluid. You need to be there, and the right people, the right teams in the field will appreciate the oversight and the accountability. But again, don't take their power. Just say, I care enough about you to make sure that you stay focused on the other things. I'm an extra set of eyes for you. I'm a resource for you. Key issue, if the standards don't exist on site on jobs, then where do they exist in a company? I mean, I think you're in our trade, in any trade, the service that you make a promise through your mission and vision and your clients' contracts, the accountability of the standard of how you do it is what they're judging you on. It doesn't matter how great you are in the office if you're terrible in the field. So I think this really comes in to play on that. And then Toby, I think I hear you say this all the time. If everyone is accountable, no one is accountable. Everybody can be accountable for their job, but they can't all be accountable for the same thing. One role can't be, what is it you always say, Toby? You can't be worn by
one person can fill two roles, but two people cannot fill one role.
Right. And I think that happens a lot, don't you?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I think that's what happened in this particular instance is, we had 4 layers of leadership show up to a job. And I think more than anything, it was a mental or an implicit handoff to each escalating leader as they showed up. But each leader, I hate to say it this way, but up the chain of command was assuming that the one below them had it under control. Right. So everyone was assuming that the other one was accountable. And so what that means at the end of the day is that nobody was. So I think it's important that we define where does the responsibility fall? The owner's role is setting the expectations, clear expectations, creating policies, enforcing consequences for those things that don't get done properly or in order on the organizational level. A GM really handles everything from an operational standpoint, soup to nuts, from sales and marketing, business development, all the way to HR, policy enforcement, things along those lines. So the GM role typically is essentially the business owner without the vision of the future and setting things in motion to be successful down the road. They're the ones that are actually handling the day-to-day operations. Then you've got a lot of times what we see is a department manager over each department. But for the sake of the conversation, we're going to really just focus on the operations, the mitigation aspect of the story. In this case, we had the owner show up, we had the project manager show up, and at the end of the day, the project manager is accountable for the project. A lot of times what we see is from scoping to collections on a particular job or several jobs. Then the technician, or actually the lead technician, would be the one who is on the job every single day, performing the work and ensuring that the work is done according to the company policy, according to the standards, things along those lines. And then the technician is the one that's doing the work. That's their only focus. They're not necessarily worried about the standards as much. They're just following the directives. What we saw in this example is that when the leadership is weak, the responsibility kind of starts falling on the wrong people. And I think what we uncovered is that the person at the end of the day who was ultimately accountable was fairly new in the role, and they didn't fully understand. They hadn't been completely trained on what it means to be a lead technician. So they were doing the best that they could, but they hadn't been fully trained. So when other leadership showed up, it was a whew, thank goodness somebody else is here to help me make sure that I'm not missing anything. But then that person, that leader that showed up, assumed that the junior leader, the lead technician, had it all under control when they didn't. So I think that's where the breakdown actually started, is that the person that showed up, and they showed up out of necessity because everybody else was busy at the moment. So it was a great opportunity to get out, get the situation stabilized, and figure out what the first steps were. So it was a great learning experience for the first responder. Unfortunately, the first responder was put in a position where they were hoping, I think, subconsciously for some help. And when the help arrived, it wasn't necessarily help. And that's when the finger started getting pointed.
That's a really good example to share with what we're talking about today. And I would tell you, they don't teach leadership in WRT class. But I'll also say that this particular incident, and again, really good example, this probably had to happen. This is one of those failures that you just have to go through, because if you don't experience it now, you're going to experience it later. You don't. Again, I think those two different parties were on different wavelengths. Each one thought that the other. Toby, I got something to add to that, but I'm going to move it into our next area that I'm talking about, because I think it's going to relate to that. And what I want to kind of spend a couple of minutes on, I have a list, a common leadership failures in restoration. Ask me where I got this list. I got this list from things that I've done wrong, or I've experienced firsthand. So let me first say, and it's not on the list, but it's related to what you just said. And this is part of, I've mentioned before that I'm creating a lot of courses and lessons and programs this year for junior leaders. One of them is the owner of the company, or any manager that is, C-suite or something like that. You kind of forget how big of an impact you make when you show up somewhere. Just your presence can be daunting, inspiring, and it can also allude to a releasing of your power to someone. You don't realize when you walk into the room that you kind of pull in, and even if you don't say anything, but especially if you do start talking to the customer, all eyes shift on you. And we have to realize that that subliminally takes away power from somebody else. So I think that's something that I would say everyone needs to look at themselves and, like, what's your energy? Good energy is good, but for the right places, right? The right energy for the right situations. Show up with a ball cap and look like just everybody else, kind of like undercover boss. Your team knows who you are, but tell them, I'm going to stop onto a job, but I don't want you to do anything different. I'm just going to be there to observe, guide, and help. Couple of common leadership failures that we've seen in restoration, probably, again, all companies, doesn't matter if you sell photocopiers or anything. Lack of clear job roles and accountability. And you just talked about that a little bit. Who's responsible for documenting this job? We know how important documentation is. We can argue whether we should document as much as we do, but the fact is it is part of the ecosystem of getting paid and collected. But if that's a team effort, if there are multiple people that are assigned to do the documentation, the same documentation, the photo, the dry logs, whatever. Now, I understand different days. If there are multiple people trying to do it, and it's a team effort, then no one takes ownership. So that when it doesn't get done because of someone legitimately might get pulled away to do something else, or something else goes wrong, if you had ownership of that, you could have delegated it and said, hey, this is my job to do, but I need to do something else. Can you do it? But if it's like everyone's kind of pitching in, then you're like, no one's going to miss me. I'm going to slip over here and do something else. And then boom, it doesn't happen. And then we start that whole conversation. So this is the importance of an accountability chart. It's not overwhelming. It's simple. And I find that people actually prefer to know what they're being, what rules am I being measured under? What am I being judged on? What's my performance based on, good or bad? When that's not clear, when it's foggy, frustration, anxiety, friction, stuff like that. Another one, failure to lead by example. I've been guilty of this, Toby, in restoration, and we've talked about PPE. An example is a manager tells a crew to wear PPE, but they show up on the job site not wearing it. And it sends a signal, whether it's implied or not, that then why is it important? If it's, do you not care about your own health, or is there really a risk? Why do we have to wear this constricting PPE, this face mask and these goggles that fog up or whatever? You know, Tyveks are hot and they're cumbersome and blah, blah, blah. But why is it okay for you to show up? And you may have an excuse saying, well, I'm just here for 10 minutes. How you do anything is how you do everything. So the owners and managers must set the tone and hold each other accountable for that. Meaning, if I'm the owner, if I'm the general manager, the ops manager, COO of a company, and I show up, I want every person on my team to have the authority, Toby, to tell me, please go outside. We've got PPE on the truck. If you as a leader can't have your team say that to you, you probably shouldn't be in your position. And that's where you lose a lot of people. You got something?
Yeah, that's what a good accountability chart does. Is it sets a clear, it sets it clear, but it allows for each person up and down the air quotes chain of command. I hate using the chain of command, but at the end of the day, that's what it is. But a good accountability chart gives everyone the freedom to hold one another accountable without having to just rely on assumption. And I think in the example the story that I shared, that's exactly what happened. Is that there was this assumption that that the person that showed up first knew what they were supposed to be doing, although they were new and hadn't been fully trained. And so when the second person in the chain of command showed up and the PPE wasn't being worn, it was, okay, I guess we're good and we'll get to work, rather than but basically doing a JHA themselves, saying, what are the hazards on this job, and verifying that the procedures that were being followed were the correct procedures. So
I think, Toby, I think creating an accountability chart is primary and it has to start, but there's also a layer that's not so visible. Is like, you can put stuff on paper. A lot of people have mission statements and core values on the walls of their company, but they don't live by them. It's just the sad truth, right? And
yep, 100%.
I would say core values, principles, they matter. It's kind of like our amendments, our constitutional rights. They matter the most when they're challenged. They matter the most of what we do when we're busy and we're hectic and we're upset and we're mad and we're happy and we're rich and we've got a lot of money or we don't. It's how you do anything is how you do everything. And that's what it's hard to teach that, but it comes from consistency and repetitive. It's like Xactimate, right? So someone learns to do estimating. You're not good on your first time. You're not good on your third time, but man, by your 12th and 18th and 113th, you're probably getting a whole lot better at it. But it's muscle memory, and you got to do it all the time, because if you miss something on a sketch or an Xactimate, it costs money. Your incentive might be tied into it. So but you got to lead by example. Again, it's oftentimes the things that aren't said. Your team might not say anything to you because you keep popping up on jobs out of PPE. You keep popping up on jobs and breaking procedures of putting your booties on. Little bitty micro cuts, but your team might not say anything. They might not call you out, which they should. But over a period of time, that becomes the culture, the standard of it's do as I say, not as I do type of thing. So I think that is what people need to focus on. Make sure that you don't just teach and proclaim something, example it, model it. Be that, and people will the cream rises to the top and they say, well, I'm not going to let the boss down. I'm going to let the company down. I'm wearing the logo in the shirt. So good stuff. Another pitfall failure is avoiding tough conversations on jobs. And it's just like what I just said. So it's up the ladder and down the ladder. If you see underperforming employees continue to be underperforming, I would say a good coworker or peer or a manager, you signal that you're there to help people and build trust. And I want you to be better by helping them and telling them. But if you continue to let me do improper work, whether it's from not knowing it was the right thing to do, forgetting, or misunderstanding, whatever. If you continue to let me fail, you're telling me that you don't care about me. You don't want to see me win. And I think we sense and we feel and we kind of materialize that, that's going to be maybe that person's toxic. Maybe that person doesn't take good criticism very well. Maybe you've already been on them about a bunch of other things. Maybe they're in the middle of a probationary period. I don't think any of those are good enough reasons not to do it. I think that you probably are missing a component of the trust of why we talk about hard conversations, but you got to have them.
Well, especially in the context of a health and safety issue, right? Like you have to have those.
Yeah.
If somebody's not wearing PPE and they should be, sadly, I mean, well, I shouldn't say sadly. You got to do it. You got to do it because at the end of the day, like it's either their feelings or their health. They can fix their feelings 9 times out of 10. Their health is a different story.
But what I see in this happening is people avoid having those conversations for a few reasons. So it's maybe they don't want to hurt someone's feelings. They don't know how to deliver accountability. They don't know how to deliver tough conversations. Very, very likely in this industry, Toby, that we are already shorthanded. It's hard to find good quality people. I've invested a lot of money into this person, and I don't want to say we've heard that from people saying,
I hear that all the time.
We don't want to. I can't crack the whip, or I won't have anybody here to do it. And well, you have a culture and people who don't want to be held accountable. You're probably not doing very well anyway. I got to be honest with you. That's the way I say it. But
well, before you move on, your favorite interview this week was with somebody who had a hard time having these conversations, these tough conversations, and he ended up with a toxic culture in his company, and he ended up having to let most everybody go.
Almost lost his company. Almost lost his family's his livelihood. And then I think that's the last part of this, avoiding tough conversations, is that's a cancer, and that spreads. The people on your team that are quality, that are engaged, that are accountable. If you're not holding the level of accountability in the bar for all people and judging people in the same way and having those tough conversations, or allowing them to have them, because some employees will tell the boss, I know you're non-confrontational, but I'll have that conversation with them because I got to work with them all day. And the owner's like, no, we don't have that. That will burn out a good employee, and they will go somewhere else tomorrow on Friday when they get their check and they look at, I didn't make any hours and I got to put up with that. I got to work next to that person who does things wrong. Then what's the incentive for me to do it right? Everyone knows that's what happens. So have the tough conversations. What's our third? Fair but firm, right, Toby? Be fair. If you're telling somebody for the first time something they didn't know was a standard, the leadership's on me. I failed on the job site for setting the standard and forecasting the vision. But if we've talked about this 2 or 3 times, you can be completely comfortable enforcing it and then having that type of conversation. If you've had it several times, you need to have an escalating behavior modification issue or performance write-ups and things like that. That has to happen. They can't just continue to get a trophy and do bad work. Last one, big one, not a surprise, in line with everything we say. Micromanaging owners and leaders who don't, and there's a lot of reasons why. I'm looking at my notes here, and I'm thinking of micromanagers. There's always an insecurity there. If I don't show everybody on my team that I know how to do what they do better than they do, then they won't respect me. That's a fallacy. There's also I micromanage because I want it done perfect, 101% instead of 80% being okay. We got a great video for that. Why don't we put that down in the bottom about Jocko and is it Darren or Jared? We'll put that video down there. Everybody will relate. But micromanaging is toxic. It's exhausting. It exhausts everybody on both sides. And then, but lead instead. Again, sometimes in the trades, the blue collar leadership, they aren't great trainers. They're great contractors. They're great craftsmen, men and women, but training is difficult, and the lack of training is creating these little micro abrasion performance issues that are causing you to think that no one can do this. What that leadership style is, no one can do this better than me, and if I don't keep my boot on everyone's butts, then they won't do the right work. And then you're probably right. If you're leading that way, that's going to be the circus that you have. The person says, we've got this task to do. We got this thing to do. Just do it. I said so. That's why. That's a bad thing. Or, start explaining the why. Here's why we need to do it. Maybe you don't know why we need to do it, but I'm going to explain it to you and make it brief and short. And really, okay. The fix is that is empower employees with reasoning, but enforce standards when needed. Man, everybody in your team should be boss for a day or a week. If you've got a lead tech, saying you're in charge of this job, you're in charge of the meeting, you're in charge of the office and the review and the audit the files. Put people into those roles and empower them. Two things are going to happen. You're going to find the gaps and know what to train. And secondly, you're going to make that person say, they go home and tell their wife or their spouse or their cousin or their dad, like, dude, I got a lot of responsibility at work this week and it felt awesome because I kicked ass and I didn't know I was capable of doing that. As opposed to, man, my boss just tells me to do it because they say so. I don't know why we're doing it, but I do it. And first job I find that pays me $1 an hour more, I'm out. And that's what's happening is people are running. Happens all the time. Yeah. But those are some, man, there's 100 more, but those are common. Usually when we peel the onion on an issue, it's falling back into some of these things and those manifest themselves into.
So the question becomes then, like, okay, what's the fix? How do we create this culture, the culture of job site accountability, but really accountability across the organization? Again, for the sake of this conversation, let's focus on the job site. The first thing is set some non-negotiables, and that sounds so freaking cliche, but have clear roles outlined. Who's accountable for what? And remember, when you do that, when you go through that exercise, if you choose to, make sure that there are not duplicate tasks listed on each role. And then when you go to assigning roles, make sure that you don't have more than one person accountable for the same role on a job, right? You can have multiple lead techs, for example, but if there's multiple lead techs that show up on a job, we need a process by which everyone understands who's accountable for that particular job that they're on. You need to have clear written standards for safety. Clark's a huge advocate. I mean, I am too by default, but Clark's a huge advocate of having a safety program. Safety programs can be daunting, just like having a playbook for your business can be daunting, but you need to have some clear written standards for safety. You need to have clear standards for documentation. What are the expectations? And I'll just throw a plug in for the 24-hour tech. That's a great way. That's a great process that's, you can just put into just about any restoration job and have all the documentation that you need. And then outline what it means to be professional inside of your organization. If you have those components in place, your whole team will be able to show up to a job and everyone will know who's accountable. Everyone will know what safety standards are expected. Everyone will know what documentation standards are expected. And everyone, by extension, will then be professional because we have been very clear about what the expectations are.
Yeah. I think it's funny you don't like the name non-negotiable, the word non-negotiable. I love that word. I love the black and white aspect of non-negotiable. I know it is cliche and corporate, but I love to play with that with the team and say, let's talk about what's a non-negotiable here at this company. And let me give you two, Toby. Being late for work. And when I say non-negotiable, this is a go, no go. You're terminated. That we don't have to negotiate over this policy. That's something we've talked about. It's important enough that it's a black and white issue. But if someone's late, I wouldn't say it's non-negotiable because there are reasons why people can be late. Now we can argue.
No call, no show, maybe.
No call, no show. We can argue over the semantics of you should have let me know.
Right.
But maybe there's a reason. So that's not in and of itself. But being drunk on the job, drinking on the job, stealing a customer's contents or business. Listen, I don't need to negotiate. There's no abstract, aspect to that. It's like you stole something. If you needed it, you could have asked and I would have given it to you. You don't steal from customers. We trust is everything. That's an instant termination. There's no HR department in this company. There's no amount of unemployment that I'm scared to pay. I can't have you in this company because our standards matter. So I love non-negotiables because listen, the right people like them too. They say, I'd like to know where the bumpers are. The others are the people say, man, if I'm just kind of lax and lackadaisical about certain things, then they can say, well, I'm not surprised. I was late, did no call, no show, and probably lost my job. So yeah, unfortunately you did. Maybe Walmart's hiring,
Yeah, I'm going to set the record straight. I do like non-negotiables. I think what I was referring to is the fact that all these things are so cliche, that people, they dismiss them as soon as you start talking about them, but they're fundamental, they're foundational, and they're super important.
That goes back to, you don't talk about them enough, and then there's right people, right seats. If you got people who don't consider non-negotiables, that's probably your first problem, and you need to go peel that onion back a little bit more. So I'll let you go ahead. I didn't want to interrupt that last little.
I was having a conversation recently with a fairly new client of ours, and one of the leaders on their team is a former law enforcement officer. And we were talking about the importance of building a playbook for their business and to constantly be training on that. And how if you do that properly, then the team will know what to do and how to respond when situations arise. It also will allow the leaders of the organization to have a way that they can educate before they just throw them in the field and just say, here, ride with Bill or ride with John, and just learn what they do. It puts some structure into the employee onboarding process. And to go back to the law enforcement officer, he said while we were having that conversation, it struck him. He's like, when he was a law enforcement officer, they trained constantly. They had SOPs that were very detailed. And the reason they did that is because in some situations, it's life or death. You follow the procedure and you train on the procedure constantly so that if a once-in-a-lifetime experience pops up, hopefully it's less than once in a lifetime, but if it were to arise, you will walk away with life and you won't be stuck there in death. And so it really resonated. He's like, man, I've never thought about it in those terms. He's like, but it's in restoration, it may not be a life or death today, but if it's a mold situation, for example, or some other contaminant, asbestos or whatever, it could lead to something catastrophic down the road. He's like, so I absolutely do see the value in training and reinforcing continuously, and that's something that's missing not only in our business, but for the industry by and large.
Yeah, I agree with the industry by and large. We don't train well, and we certainly don't retrain. I think what we see is a lot of turnover, and when we have a catastrophic project, something goes wrong. There's a lot of people on the team that probably say, you know what, we used to do that really well. We've just kind of haven't readdressed it, and here it is biting us again because we didn't make it stay important. I'm sitting here chuckling at your story of the cop, and then we open this up and I want people to know, we're obviously leaving out people's names, and if they're listening, they might know, but we get such a benefit, Toby, of experiencing real world, issues like this with people in real time and helping be part of the process of maybe solving it, hopefully. And it gives us constant conversations and topics to help retrain others. Like that story, that could help 600 companies over the next 3 years that listen to this podcast. And I just think I wanted to just sidebar that I'm just kind of flabbergasted at this type of education is possible from people love real world. I think our class is like that, but yeah, train, retrain. We've got a lesson in RBA about EDGE, EDGE. If training's not easy for you, there are frameworks that can simplify it because I think we try to make it difficult. We're trying to look at all the stuff, but the train, retrain, and it takes several times and some people more times. I know a lot of smart people that don't test well. It just takes a while to recall something. We're not robots. We're not AI. So that's a good one.
I think it's I think it's you referred to EDGE. I think that's a great framework. And for those that don't know what it is, it's an acronym. It's educate, demonstrate, guide, and evaluate. And what each of those means is, when somebody comes in, like I was referring to with a company playbook, if you have a good employee onboarding process, sit them down in front of a computer or in front of your the new employee binder or whatever that has all of your SOPs in it, and tell them what to do. Educate them on the ABC restoration way, right? Teach them what your expectations are, and teach them what the process is from an OSHA standpoint, from an IICRC standpoint, and from your company standpoint. Educate them on the process. Then put them out in the field with someone that's good at the process, and have them have the lead person or the field worker or whoever show the new employee how to do it. Then guide them through the process. Let the new employee, and I'm using a new employee because it's just an easy example right now, but guide them through the process. Let them do it. Let them get hands-on while you're standing there and giving them real-time feedback, and do that maybe for a day. Let them do it for a day. And then once you see that they're proficient in whatever it is that we're training them to do, let them go do it on their own. Then that's the evaluation process. Let them do it on their own, and then hold them accountable to perform their role, and then make some adjustments as needed. So that's the EDGE method, and it's a great framework. We use it all the time. I'm glad you brought it up. Educate, demonstrate, guide, and evaluate.
We'll put that down in the lesson below. And you talk about a culture, Toby, that becomes a culture that applies to almost everything you do. And it really reinforces something we said earlier. I think mentorship program, I think hierarchy on org charts, while they aren't necessarily about who's in charge, it's about who's responsible to make sure that everybody on the team is like, there may be someone who's just a great trainer and teacher. They should be on job sites. They don't need to be in the office writing SOPs all the time. They need to be in the field, hands-on, exampling, modeling, setting, and then evaluating, see who's getting it stronger. And then maybe relook at your process. If people aren't picking up the training, maybe it's too hard. Maybe it's too complicated. Maybe it doesn't make sense. And you got to reevaluate your own SOP.
Yeah.
So
you
good.
You make an interesting point about having somebody sit in the office writing SOPs. I'm not a fan of that method. And a lot of people, when they think of designing their playbook, they think of, oh man, I really should pull somebody out of the field and just have them write SOPs all day long. I don't think that's the best way. Having someone write SOPs that are then handed down to whoever is in the role, saying, here's the process. I don't think that's the best way. I really think that a collaborative effort to write your SOPs is the best way, because you're going to get the kind of the best practices from all parties. And it can be a refining process more than, let me just sit here and try to create this SOP in a vacuum. SOPs shouldn't be created. You should be documenting. And I think that's a very important distinction. So one last thing that I wanted to talk about when we're talking about creating this culture of job site accountability is, and we kind of danced around it a little bit, but having an accountability chart, getting super clear on the roles and things like that. But every single job, every single day, someone has to have the final say on site. We need to have a kind of a hierarchy or a process that says, if this, then that, so that everyone understands when we leave the job for the day, who's got the final say for today, or when we show up today, who's got the final say. And to go back to the beginning of this conversation in the story that I shared, it's more of when we show up, who has the final say. Because as people were arriving and getting to work on this emergency response or this job, everybody assumed as they showed up that it was under control, and it wasn't. So getting super clear on every single job, who is accountable and who has the final say on site is super important to creating that culture of job site accountability.
Yeah, it doesn't matter where you are with title and up and down the org chart and it doesn't matter. And back to Toby, your example of a cop. when there is a crime scene, when there's an incident or a confrontation or a whatever, someone has to be said, you're taking the lead on this. They can't all be doing, because there's certain things that the lead investigator, the lead cop has to do. They have to do the paperwork. They have to do this. They have to report a certain way. They've got to make sure their body cam's on, whatever. But someone has to be put in charge, but they might be the rookie. It's okay. Put the rookie, put the new gal, the guy that just started with your company that hadn't even been to WRT yet. If they're picking it up and say, you know what, I just want you to take pictures of every room, show them how, four corners. You got the final say. Tell them, you tell me that if you look at our job file, if you look at our Encircle or whatever software you're using, and there aren't pictures there, I want you to say, we're not done here. I want you to tell all these bosses, we're not finished. You didn't do your job. I don't care that I'm a newbie. I was put in charge today, and I'm going to do my job because it's important and it matters. So good stuff, man. Good leadership is creating and holding it, right? We've already talked about it. It's great. You can put all the SOPs, you can put all these processes, you can put someone's always the final say. But what are you going to do when you get a freeze warning or you get 13 jobs in one night? Or that's when we get tested about how do we do things then. Now, that's going to lead me, Toby, into my next one is you can do all the things you want to do. You can have all the best intention processes. You can use Trainual. But sometimes it just still doesn't happen. And sometimes leadership takes a break. Sometimes you just start focus on the business and the money more than the standards and the processes and the leadership. And so I want to talk a little bit about that during this segment. If we know failure is going to happen, it's not if, it's when, and hopefully it's not too much. It's what do? You address it immediately. Don't let the problems fester. Bad news doesn't get better by letting it go. That's just an old rule.
That's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened in this particular scenario. It just kept piling on and getting worse. So
it does,
man. Yeah,
it becomes other things. It becomes other things that didn't have to be festering. Other personality conflicts happened because there was this underlying thing. But leadership did not say, "Hold on, everyone. We got a lot to clean up. Let's finish this job, but we're going to debrief. We're going to have an AAR. We're going to have after action at the office. Maybe tomorrow morning, everybody's gassed out tonight. I don't want anyone going home mad. This happened. It's my fault, but we're going to clear it up tomorrow, and we don't want it to happen again." But you got to do that. You can't wait till next week when you slow down. Because when you slow down in this industry, sometimes never. And then we forget. We don't recall stuff. So address it. If it's a small thing, don't make it a big one. But if it's a bigger thing, make an adjustment. If someone's not performing their job well and they're literally just falling apart, switch them out. So you know what? Let's let Victor take the lead. And you'll do it again next time. You'll get another chance. I see what happened. I let you down, blah, blah, blah. Identify the real problem. Is it training, leadership, or laziness? Don't solve the wrong problem with the wrong solution. We tried to create Band-Aids instead of addressing the bullet holes. It's a very famous blog that we wrote years ago in a Morgan Wallen song. But don't solve the wrong problem. If you've got people not doing their jobs, address the SOP issue, not the person problem. They're just doing their job and they don't have an SOP. If there's no accountability chart, blame yourself, and I'm going to address that. The problem isn't the people are all trying to be the bosses, is they don't know what else to do. So address the real problem and not the fake problem. Hold people accountable. If standards aren't followed, enforce the consequences. Everyone should already know, negotiable, non-negotiable, what level of critical severity is a standard. Some things matter a whole lot more than others. Cleaning a job the right way, if it's category 3, has higher implications, more risk, more consequences. It's more important. But tightening a screw on a HEPA vac, probably not the end of the world, right? Or losing an attachment. That happens. It's not the end of the world. Let's don't make it the end of the world. But hold people accountable, saying we still don't need to lose equipment. It costs us money. But again, maybe we need a system to QC our equipment and check and make sure stuff doesn't disappear. Maybe we need a tool bin. Maybe we need a table to put all our supplies on so they're not scattered around. Find a solution, solve the real problem, not the fake problem. And I'll tell you what to do next is if you haven't done well with leadership in the past and you've got some people that have fortunately stayed with you and you maybe hear this or you do some others and you recognize that, I got a lot of making up to do, to go back to your team collectively, individually, and say, you know what, I have really put you into a lot of situations with reviews, put you down, held you back, but I'm realizing that it's really my fault and I've let us down. So I want to gain your trust back, and let's address those and let's clean the slate and start over. I'm going to create processes. I'm going to have others create them. But I think you are a great addition to the team, and I think you're more than capable, and you have all the potential in the world. Rebuild that trust. And I'm going to tell you about it, it's just going to turn everything around. But it's never too late. If they're still with you, they're still there at the company, if they're still participating, then they believe in something. They just want to see somebody step up. So those are the things that I would say do next, Toby, is address immediately, identify and address the real problems. Make sure you're peeling the onion and ask the why question. Why did this happen? Why did this happen? Why did this happen? Hold people accountable, and then rebuild the trust and expectations and restate them. You mentioned earlier training. You got to do it several times. You've got to repeat. You got to be a parrot, and you've got to repeat the expectations, because we have a lot to do and we forget. So,
yeah. You said something there. When leadership fails, rebuilding credibility can take time. When I was in corporate, I had to, bless his heart, Don Chambers, what a great guy. Old school trucking, man. And if you know anything about old school trucking, man, they were ruffians. But he told me many, many times, it takes a whole lot of attaboys to make up for a 1-0 shit.
It does.
So that plays into the whole, it takes time to rebuild that credibility. So just stick with it. You can rebuild it. If it's catastrophic failure, obviously it's going to, it may be more difficult, but if it's just little things over time, just take the time, and just work on the relationship.
Leadership, and any leadership. So whether it's job site or in the office or raising a company or your family or your church, whatever, it's not like martial arts where you get a black belt and you're there. It's a lifetime. It's John Maxwell. I'm a huge fan. He's probably 80, and seems like he's still learning something all the time and increasing and improving his variation of what leadership is, and how he has to modify leadership because the generations change and different people come into his life and stuff. But I would just say, Jordan Peterson writes about the standards we set for ourselves. We're looking externally at the bar. We should have an internal bar saying, this is the leader that I want to be. And I'm nowhere near there, and I'm just going to keep learning and get better. But people around you, if you're leading well, they're going to have grace and mercy and say, yeah, you stumbled a little bit. I think the best leaders in the world do stumble, and that probably makes them better leaders. So don't give up on yourself. Don't think you're embarrassed. Don't think your team has given up on you, because if they're still there, they're still there. Show up. It's never too late to turn over a new leaf and do better. And then eventually you'll do better on 16, 18, 43 different areas. And you're changing people's lives and stuff like that. So,
well, man, this has been a good one. A good one.
Yeah. Real into clouds for some people, but I bet everyone, Toby, relates to things that have happened, that maybe some examples that we gave or something closely aligned with what we talked about. But this is one of those things where I say it all the time, they don't teach this in ICRC. These aren't the conversations that insurance companies want us to document, but these are the things that make where we spend most of our time, which is at work on job sites, makes them tolerable, maybe even fulfilling and better, and having impact and actually developing a passion for what we do so that we can grow and be something more. But that starts, most good people did not get great if they did not eventually find good leadership. If they only had bad leaders, they unfortunately have been given a terrible hand, and they stay in that. But if they've ever struck a nerve and got lucky and won a lottery ticket and found a good leader, it can change everything. And I think that's why good leaders are trying to be good leaders for other people, is because they remember what it meant for them.
Yeah. Well, to bring this full circle, talking about jobs, leadership on the job site isn't about authority. It's about responsibility. So appreciate you all hanging out with us this long. Ask yourself, is accountability clear in your business? Who is truly responsible for the outcomes on every job? If you get super clear on that, your life will be a lot easier. Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe. And we've got some links down in the description below.
Hey, one thing,
Peace.
Toby, before hey, hold on, Toby,
Yeah.
before we take off, I'd like you to pick up and show our hoodies and shirts. I want everyone to know that we have some swag, and we have a link down below. And we don't make a huge profit of them, but we want people to have, if you're Restoration AF, and look at the patch on the sleeve, and then we've got that in the shirt, and then we've got a hoodie here.
I don't know if you can see it. Yep.
It's a really soft, good hoodie. They fit well. They've got the little kangaroo pocket and stuff like that. We've got multiple sizes. We've got a website. We'll put the link down below. But if you want one of those, you want to walk around, if you're an employee, ask your boss if it's okay. If he says, hey, I love it, then get him one too, or her one too. So like and subscribe to our podcast. Check out our other podcasts that we do, Alternative Weeks. My favorite interview guest this week is the name of it. And that's just interviewing awesome humans in this industry out of this human. They're necessarily not big figures and icons. They're just normal people like you and me, and even like Toby. So, hey, we had a great time spending it with you this week. And if you have any comments, if you have anything else you want to do, comment below or bring it over to RBA, to Restoration Business Academy. We got a whole lot of great people, a couple hundred people over there having great conversations. Bring in your 2 cents worth there, and let's grow. Take care. Peace out.
Peace.